So this is our crazy Sailomat Wind Vane self-steering system. If you don't know what a Wind Vane self-steering system is, today we're going to explain it to you and show you how this specific type works, and we're going to go through and talk about the different types of wind vanes and what they're needed for, and you name it, we're going to talk about it. So I dry fit this in the studio yesterday. I know there's a lot of visual information happening, but I wanted to show you guys what it looks like out of the water so you could really understand how it works. A lot of videos will show it underway, which is cool, but this is going to give you sort of a more clear understanding of the mechanics of what's going on. And it's basically black magic because it's completely insane that this works. So let's get into how this specific type of wind vane works and what we need to do when we go to install it. So we went with the vintage Sailomat 3040 model. It's from 1979. I bought it secondhand, and it's an auxiliary rudder system with servo pendulum, which is kind of unique, and we'll talk about that later. Let me show you how wind vanes work, and then we'll get into the details. So basically, you mount this on your transom, and this system is very simple. It only has these two mounting points, and you can adjust the angle depending on the shape of your transom. Now, in some ways, this is not a great system. The modern sort of monitor wind vanes have armatures and stuff that go out because there are great loads that are put on this system that transfer to your transom. So we're going to be reinforcing our transom quite a bit where this bolts on, but you can adjust the angle and everything, and we'll get into all that when we go to the install videos. But when this piece is installed, this mast tube is going to be vertical. So you just get a level and you make sure that's vertical so this body sits. But since we're mounting on a flat wall, this is how we get it set up today. You want to have 80% of the rudder underwater. So our water line is going to be, around here between these fins. And come up top. Basically how wind vanes work is you're sailing, you find your compass course, you got your boat balanced, your sails are all balanced and the boat's happy, and you adjust your vane to have the edge of your vane into the wind. So it's basically standing vertical because wind's traveling on either side. Much like when you let go of your helm and your boat comes up into the wind because your main wants to point in that direction with equal flow on either side. That's what happens with this. So once you set this, you adjust this where the wind's coming over either side, and then you lock it in place. And our system has this control knob that will have like a line around here, and you adjust this. That's how you can adjust this, and it turns this. So this is mounted on your transom, or somewhere near to the helm, and then you adjust this, tighten this down, and that holds this position. Now once we have our paddle, our wind vane paddle, set in the direction where the wind's coming across it, when your boat wanders off course, the whole unit's going to go. That means the wind is traveling here, and then say the wind's coming here, it pushes it, and you see down below our oar down there. Our oar is moving. So this turns the oar, and then the wind traveling over the oar will turn the rudder to bring it all back. So the wind pushes here, this steers, that makes the oar turn, and see how this does? And as the oar goes through the water, it brings it back and turns the auxiliary rudder to steer the boat back onto course. Does the same thing in the opposite direction. Goes this way, and it turns it back until everything's in line. And and if your wind is coming off the beam, then you turn it there, and it does the same thing. If the wind gets on the side of the paddle, it turns it down, which would do this, steers it back into line. So that's how this type which is a auxiliary rudder with servo pendulum, which again I said is pretty rare. We have a cable here that disengages the auxiliary rudder from the paddle so that any motion here doesn't steer that. So when you're sailing and you don't want it activated, you can lock this down, you lock your paddle down so that there's not like a lot of silliness happening. And you pull this up to a cam cleat. Like I'll be replacing this wire with a Dyneema or just a line that'll go to a cam cleat. So you can pull that up and disengage the autopilot. What else do we talk about? Okay, I can show you this. There's a small weight here that you can move up and down to get balance on how much your how much wind there is on your paddle. So to balance your paddle, you see how heavy that is that way? And then if we adjust our lead weight here, it adjusts that. So this is like a fine-tuning mechanism, this lead weight. And I'll show you guys a detailed shot of all this stuff. There's also a knob here to where you can adjust how much this goes over. So depending on how much the boat is kind of moving through the water, you depending on the sea state and the wind state, you can adjust how much the kind of throw is. So that's kind of the basics of this system. Everything's detachable, so you can easily take off this paddle and change it. I'll show you the other paddles we have. So you can remove this, change the paddle depending on the conditions. For installation, you remove the mast tube and you can remove all of the rudder systems. We have quick release pins here that release the oar, and we have quick release pin that releases the rudder. So you install the unit and then you can put everything in place. The other cool thing is there's like this groove here, which I'll show you a detail of, that is a safety feature. So if you hit something, a log or something hits it, it'll snap at this point so that not only is the rudder not damaged and salvageable, but it doesn't rip your transom apart, So that's a really cool safety feature that Sailomat put into this unit. So that's like the basics of this unit. Let's get in and talk about all the spares we got and about different wind vane systems and what we plan to do with this. So as I mentioned, we bought our system secondhand. I actually got it on eBay. I can't remember the gentleman's name right now. I bought it for $1. He was up in Northern California near San Francisco. Me and Camille drove over there and picked it up, and I think he was originally asking $1,900 for the system, which is still an insane bargain, but I didn't have $1,900, so I got him down to $1,700 and we made it work. A wind vane is absolutely essential if you're doing offshore cruising or ocean passages. If you're doing day sails or you're exploring your local cruising grounds for weekends or even week-long trips, you don't really need the expense and everything of having a wind vane self-steering system. If you're planning on doing ocean passages or blue water cruising, then you certainly need a wind vane if you can manage one, if one will fit on your boat. Sometimes, like the larger boats get, it's really hard to find a wind vane system that'll work. For any boats kind of over 45 feet, it's very difficult to find systems that'll work. So for anyone out there who is interested in blue water sailing, this is an absolutely necessary part of your kit for your boat. Let's talk about the different systems that exist. There are servo pendulum, which generally they're the most common, and basically what they do is the paddle in the wind, like I showed you, controls a trim tab that's in the water, which goes to control lines that uses your own rudder on your boat to steer based on the movement of the wind controlling the trim tab. That's the most common kind. And what it does is it runs lines like through your cockpit and then over to your tiller or to your wheel, and then steers with your own rudder. Now, I didn't want a system where there were tons of lines running all over the cockpit. There's nothing wrong with those systems, it just wasn't for me. The other type is auxiliary rudder system. The most common one of those today is the monitor wind vane, and it's really self-controlled, self-contained, so it has like a gearbox, it has a vane, and then a rudder. So it's a very simple setup. It does have like quite a bit of armature that goes off to your transom to account for all the loads. But that system's cool because, and like our system, if something happens to your main rudder and you lose steerage, you can use that as an auxiliary rudder. So you can have a like an attachment tiller that hooks onto those systems. Both the monitor has that option and our system has that option. And for me, that was like a big selling point in this type. Between that and the fact that you don't have any lines in the cockpit, that's why I went with an auxiliary rudder system. Our system is a combination of the two, and it's very unusual. And I don't know if there are any contemporary versions of this setup, but it uses the wind vane paddle with the trim tab oar to steer the auxiliary rudder. And what that does is that trim tab oar uses the power of the ocean to move that rudder. So there's, with the monitors, I believe you have to have kind of pretty big paddles because it's just using the force of the wind to turn that rudder, which is more difficult. And the monitors are all over the world. People seem to really like them, and if I was forced to buy like a new contemporary one on the market, I would probably go with the monitor. The other great types of servo pendulum. The best one in my opinion is the Cape Horn wind vane. It's, and not just because it's from Eve, who sailed his Albert 30 around the world. He actually made his own, and then after his circumnavigation, went into production with the one he had designed for himself. So that takes us to the next option, is if you can't afford this crazy setup, whether new or used, you can make your own. People made wooden ones for a long time. 50s and 60s, people were making wooden ones all the time, and all of my heroes that were sailing, they made their own. And here's a great book you can find online called Self-Steering for Sailing Craft. And this outlines ways that you can actually tie your jib off to your tiller in different configurations to make your boat self-steer without any kind of wind vane steering system. This also kind of goes into showing you how to make different systems. And there's also a number of different books out there and plans that you can get that will show you how to make one for your boat. I was very close to making my own because I couldn't find anything I could afford. But I'm kind of obsessive, and when there's a piece of gear that I'm looking for, I look every day, probably 5 times a day, like eBay, Craigslist, all over the place. And so when this one popped up and it was within my price range, I scooped it up. And I think we bought this like 6 months ago. We've had it for a minute, but we're finally to the point to where we can install it. With this system, one of the reasons he was selling it cheap was that one of the brackets was broken. So it was cast aluminum. This, where you mount, this mounts to the transom, and it was broken here. So, and I asked him, I was like, how did that break? Because I was concerned if it broke under weight. And he said he was taking it off the boat to service it and put pressure on it and snapped it. So he was like, it was completely my fault. And he had sailed, there's actually videos on YouTube of him sailing with this unit, which I'll put a card up right now, and I'll put a link down below. And he sailed with it all the way down from San Francisco, got to San Diego, and then when he broke the bracket, he was leaving for Hawaii in a couple days from then, and ended up having to buy a monitor and just mount it on and then sell to Hawaii with this new one. So he just didn't need it anymore, and which worked out for me. So to deal with this, and this is one of the reasons we didn't install it until now, was that we needed to replace this bracket. And I looked into making my own, and it was a bigger feat than I could manage. So after we were, actually while we were at the Ventura Harbor Boatyard hauled out, and I saw how competent those guys were, I gave them this bracket and the armature that goes to it, and I had them weld us an insanely beefy new bracket. So that's what we're actually using, and it's a beautiful thing. So they did a great job on that and gave us a really fair price. So yeah, so now we can install it. So our system came, this gentleman who we bought it from made a ton of spares of everything, which is really cool. He's a great sailor and like a good craftsman, and just like, I can't believe like the amount of stuff we got with this system. So this is the original heavy weather sail, heavy like high winds Wind Vane paddle. You see it's shorter and stubbier than the big one. That one's from Sailomat in Sweden. He made this completely insane spare rudder with the collar and everything, which is crazy. He also made, and it's I have to finish this one off, but he made this spare oar paddle, which just needs a little bit of finishing. So the previous owner actually met up with the designer here in Southern California. I believe his name is Stellan Nass, a Swedish engineer, and he said when he met with him, he was talking to him about the unit, and Mr. Nass had said, and if I'm saying that name wrong, I apologize, I'll put it on the screen down below so you guys can understand what I'm saying. He said the only weak link in this system was this small plastic kind of linkage inside. He was like, that's the only Achilles heel in this whole system. And he said the gentleman reached on his desk and handed him a bronze version. He was like, here's a bronze version, now the system's perfect. And the previous owner took and had a spare of the spare made in bronze. So I have 2 bronze spares, and the plastic one's still inside, and it's still in perfect condition. So that's incredible, you know? I have a spare of one of the armatures inside, lots of spare nuts and bolts, knobs. Seems like these were the originals, and they were replaced, so that's cool. Another thing he had made is like ultra light wind paddles out of coroplast, and we'll see if these work or not. If they don't, I might make one out of like a stainless frame with like spinnaker type material that could be really light air paddle to use. But all this stuff, we'll just test it out locally and see what works, and then take what spares make sense to take with us when we go cruising. The other amazing resource that came with this unit was all of the original paperwork, which I geek out on this stuff super hard. And not only is it really difficult to track down manuals for vintage systems like this, but this is like a provenance of this equipment, because it has the original manual, which is very thorough and gorgeous and cool, and the maintenance information, all the brochures, all of the original letters. So the sailor who originally bought this piece, it has all of his correspondence with Scanmar, who was actually like the like a authorized dealer of Sailomat in the U.S. in Sausalito. And so all of his correspondence back and forth with them about what he wanted. There's like It shows the transom shapes and everything. So, and the cool thing is, like, this unit was delivered almost exactly 41 years to right now. So kind of the latest letter was like May 15th of 1979 of when they were getting ready to deliver it to him. And right now it's May 6th, 2020. So this system was not cheap when it was originally purchased. The model itself, the 3040, was $2,800. And then with all of the add-ons, he got additional vane, heavy weather, smaller vane, rudder safety tube, oar safety tube, ball seat housing, all of this. He like kind of got the full package of everything you could get. And all in, it looks like he paid $4,182 in 1979. So it was not a cheap unit, and it's built like a tank. It is completely crazy. With the everything attached, it's got to weigh over 100 pounds. It's crazy. So let's go into a music montage of close-up shots, and on the next episode, we're going to get into installing this on the boat. We'll be installing it with small G10 shims to make up for the transom, curvature of the transom for the brackets, and then we'll be heavily reinforcing inside the aft lazarette where the bolts and everything go through. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed finding out about this system, and it's gonna be awesome.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. It helps us a lot.
Thanks again to all of our patrons. Your contributions help us get the boat ready for big things.
Until next time.